everybody. Oh, here we go. Thanks, Laura. All right, welcome everybody. We'll introduce ourselves first. So, Georgia, do you want to introduce yourself first?
Sure. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Georgia Allen. I see some of the guests here, and I know a few of you. So thank you for joining today. I wear many hats, but first and foremost, I'm a mother to my daughter, Azaria. She's 7 years old. My professional role, I co-founded a home care cooperative. The name is Soaring Independent Cooperative. It is a worker-owned home care agency in Madison. Another hat that I wear is a program manager with United Way of Dane County's Corporate and Community Engagement Department. And I also work on this a child care project, cooperative project. I lead that as well. I believe in giving to my community. I serve as a board of director on 3 local boards. But again, my most important role is to my mother and making sure that the world that she grows up in is, and the children she's around that are going to be adults, has what they need. Just a little bit about what influenced me. My professional and volunteer roles reflect the passion I have to contribute to solutions and initiatives that will truly promote nurturing spaces that allow communities of color to thrive, especially those single parent homes. The confluence of my experiences, both personal, myself and of the ones, people in my community, ranging in all ages, allows me to recognize and respect the range of factors that inform an individual's values and experiences. So with all of that, my passion ultimately, as you can see in some of my roles, is to remove the barriers to success through innovative support systems that would, for communities that would usually lack opportunities to achieve and maintain like middle class status or reach their highest calling. So that's me. I'll kick it over to Gretchen.
Hi, everybody. I'm Gretchen. I graduated from the School of Human Ecology in Community Nonprofit Leadership in May of 2020. And since then have found myself as a master's student in the Community Development and Action Program at Vanderbilt. This research got kicked off last January. So it's been about 15 months now. We're getting it together, and the pandemic has brought us all these surprises and all these wonderful things amongst our collective trauma that we're experiencing. But it's brought us all together at this moment, and I'm grateful for that. A little bit more about me. I've worked with Soaring Independent Cooperative for over 2 years now, and moved into a role of a strategic initiatives director working, and that's kind of part of this, right? Is Georgia will get a little bit more into how childcare connects with the rest of the direct care work. But I know some of you are interested in knowing like how me and Georgia got to know each other, and I'll just briefly touch on that. When I was a junior, I was teaching for a class for Dr. Jennifer Gaddis. Georgia and 2 other worker owners were invited to, speak to the class. And I essentially ran out of that classroom and was like, I will do anything to be able to work with you. Because she was talking about all these things, right? And how all this direct care works. And even at that point, she was speaking to childcare. So, I mean, however long, Georgia been thinking about this for a long time. And it's so, I'm so honored to be able to help bring this to light. So I think with that, we'll move on. So for our time together today, we're going to try to keep it kind of informal, right? Like we want you to ask questions. Please put any questions in the chat or save them for the end, and we'll do our best to address them throughout the presentation. So first, we'll give pretty in-depth on like problem identification, which was so crucial to how we you know, chose to make this a community like engaged study. But then also we'll dig into part 1 and part 2 of the project, and then finally talk a little bit about our next steps. So as mentioned, there's part 1 and part 2. So originally this project was just supposed to be part 2, but March pandemic happened, right? So we had more time to talk and explore about the geographic and temporal landscape, and then using pre-existing data, and then we collected our own data for part 2 in the form of interviews. So, all right, Georgia, do you just want to quick go through these definitions?
Sure. In case there's guests here who don't know like some of the terms that we might use, non-standard hours would be time, non-traditional or non-standard work hours that we might mention would be time spent working outside of the hours of 6 a.m. To 6 p.m. Those would include nights, overnights, and weekends. So those are the non-standard hours that I'll refer to in some of the things that I talk about. And the group childcare is an arrangement for more children than a family childcare. So it's a group setting that allows more children to be cared for, and it's typically done in a commercial building. Family care is a family care arrangement, which some people have shared they've utilized, where a small group of children in a residential setting environment are being cared for. Friends, family, neighbor care is something that I know very well as some people have shared they've been raised or cared for by friends, family, and neighbor. So that's a parent utilizing a person's home or care services that is related to them, a friend or neighbor, such as like a babysitter or a nanny. So these are typically not necessarily, we said it's exempt, but there are strict restrictions around that, around how many children you can serve. So the licensing and regulations are quite tight. So as I shared a little bit about my intro, and I was able to share with the Washington Post a little bit about how my personal experiences and watching those of many others provoked me to look more into the child care issues and what they actually contributed, like what type of barriers they created for people in communities of color. The navigating benefit cliffs like child care subsidy doesn't necessarily support career advancement opportunities to make a living wage, and I found the same issues I was having, and many others in my generation were those in previous generations, like our parents and community of colors, and the decisions, why they made the decisions they did, and how that impacted like education for the children, impacted their opportunities to pursue educational goals or a better career, or a career that would meet their family needs. So the benefit cliffs is what that article was about. And so I wanted to build something that allows people, those communities, it understands what barriers they're facing, so we can build those solutions, and a safety net, so when they're a bridge to the better quality of life that they pursue when they hit a benefit cliff. And that called for research. And so when the Mortgage Center, reached out, this is a perfect opportunity that I was already pursuing, but we had the opportunity to partner with the Mortgage Center. Within the home care business, the home care cooperative, as you can see, it's quite a few women, and we're all women actually. And so in order for, so we're cooperative, we operate in the best interest of the members and the people that we serve. One thing that we found, which wasn't different before we incorporated, was that childcare was a huge barrier to reliable, quality care that we could provide. So then we started to take initiative within our cooperative to build this system to support the children and the families during those non-traditional hours. Our home care provides 24/7 home care services, which is typical in direct care work for nursing homes, residential assistant homes. So these women and many others, even myself working in a administrative role in a hospital, needed non-traditional or non-standard working um, non-standard hours of care for our children. And um, diving deeper into that, I learned that this was an issue across the world. So my team and I kind of piloted our internal system of childcare support, which we were already doing um, together in our communities. We just kind of built a formal system. Um,
Yeah, so just a quick, I think this quote really kind of attempts to encapsulate what Georgia's really talking about, is that these findings reflect that the nature of childcare is a responsibility that constrains all activities rather than being an activity in itself. So Georgia, as you were just saying, right, like providing like childcare is really what was critical for this business. Can you just speak a little bit to that too?
Yeah, again, and I'll probably touch on this in order a little bit here, but uh, training, childcare, and the cooperative business model, which allows for these the workers to have a stake in the business. They're able to build equity. They're able to invest in themselves and be a part of something that wasn't typically would have not been available if they could do it by themselves. That output influence our community as a whole with, we're caring for the workers, we're caring for their families, and caring for the community. Not just the workers, but the people that we're serving are not able to get what they need because of the increased training, the childcare, and the business model. So again, just touching on the the coming from us as a woman, the founding group, coming from a community that was already supporting each other in multiple ways, assisting with family caregiving for children, aging relatives, and individuals with physical or mental disabilities. I basically unintentionally built a cultural competent network of support. And so we wanted to take that further and learn from others outside of our network or outside of our cooperative of how they perceive and the challenges, perceived childcare and navigated those and the impacts it made on their families. So that is where, this, we expanded our thinking on creating a community childcare network by collaborating at the time with Northside Planning Council. This is what that foundation is how we shaped our approach in the questions that we asked during this research about the functioning of informal systems and the preferences to formalize those systems. And when we talk about that, we're talking about the friends, family, and neighbor care that we learned a lot, both previous generations from in the Midwest. I can talk about that was some of our responses: Midwest, Chicago, Indiana, Minnesota, in Wisconsin. A lot of community of colors really utilize those systems, those friends, family, and neighbor systems, because they were accessible, in some way affordable, but maybe not the quality that they were seeking. But we'll touch on that a little bit further.
Yeah.
Oh, and I apologize. If you want to go back to that screen, just to give you context of what you're looking at, the group provider center that we touched on in that definition is the supporting of increasing home family care providers in these communities that are typically needing more support to have those to have the in-home childcare centers, family childcare centers. I'm sorry, you can use them interchangeably. Sorry.
So with that, really, we knew that we were collaborate. Like the Northside Planning Council was also doing like wanting to do this work, and we knew that some sort of like evidence-based approach would serve us best, and really trying to take this community a community solution, right? So folks in the home care with the home care co-op, we're experiencing these things, and how could we use that as a frame of reference to then expand beyond that to see how else are people dealing with childcare. So I'm just going to dive really quick in just as a little bit of context here. So nationally, just to set the foundation, right? 65% of mothers with children under the age of 6 participate in the workforce. And this is particularly true for Black women, who have the highest workforce participation rate out of any racial group in the US. And further, 43% of children have at least one parent that works non-standard hours. So we're going up towards a half, right, of people that could use services beyond those typical standard hours. And 34% of those people work non-standard hours voluntarily. So I think in particular, we often have this deficit model of non-standard hours, that people are forced to take these hours, though that's only perhaps true for 2 out of 3 people. And that can happen, right? Like you can tag team, right? So parent goes to work for first shift and then second shift, and like childcare is taken care of. So finding that people are having to make really creative solutions to be able to come out and have reliable childcare. Madison also has a historical context, and this really influences the situation that childcare is in right now, is this urban design and the consequences for this urban design. And we wanted just to provide this map, right? So there's the historical redlining in Madison that happened during the 1930s. And in our geographic analysis, we're finding that care, in first part, really has this, is reflective of this segregation that happened a long time ago, right? And as you can see in the bottom map, that's 2010. And that's where Black families are living currently, which is this pattern replicated. And as I'm sure many of you are familiar with, is the Race Equity Report. And these historical patterns of violence are shown in this, right? So really quick, 48% of Black third graders did not meet reading proficiency standards, and right, so these are statistics that are perhaps not what we want to root this in, but just to have this awareness of, so that we can show it's a systemic problem that we're trying to address. So the first part here, as for our findings, we used the following data, the Wisconsin Department of Children and Families data, to provide a understanding of the licensed care providers. So we used their registry, and then we also used the UW-Madison Applied Population Labs Neighborhood Indicators Project to really look at this spatial analysis. So for some of our findings, so we used geographic information system maps to create this map. And we used, to bring to your attention, we used March 2020 data. And that was the most recent data that we had to provide the most stable analysis, right? So right now people are open for limited hours or whatnot. So we kept tight with just using March 2020 to see what it was like before the pandemic, so that as we're going forward and with the community trying to imagine a better system, that that works for everybody. This is kind of what we wanted to analyze first. So as you can see, here we could clearly identify that the west side of Madison is where the majority of childcare is concentrated. So specifically in zip code 53719, that has the highest density per zip code, and it has about 3.7 childcare providers per square mile. And comparatively on the north side in 53704, that had about 1.3 childcare providers per square mile, leaving it to have characteristics of a childcare desert. And to add to, in this licensing data from DCF, we realized that a lot of the childcare in the north side of Madison is ages 2.5 or 3 and above. So there's the public schools up there, there's community centers, but childcare for infants and toddlers was really, really lacking. And here, so the closing times of providers, we tried to represent visually in this like massive drop off. And as this is March 2020 data, so who knows, like right now we don't necessarily have an accurate assessment of closing times. But this just is to say that this severely impacts non-standard hour workers, particularly second and third shift, because after 6:30, there's really not that much available. And last from this part, the last thing in part one that we wanted to point out is that we were finding that the childcare enrollment rates, right? So the rate of available care in the zip code compared to the number of children actually enrolled in care who live in that zip code was very different depending on the demographics. So in the County Grove and the Dungeon Monroe areas, which had over 98% white folks living there, they had enrollment rates that surpassed the actual capacity of care. But in other areas, specifically in the Allied neighborhood and Wexford Ridge by the Lucier Center, the enrollment rates were really low. So this kind of prompted us to be like, okay, so now we really want to do these interviews to see, okay, so like how are these children being cared for, and how can we what is happening, you know? So that led us to part 2. So Georgia, would you kind of just take us through like these 3 research questions that you and the home care worker owners came up with?
Yeah, so really want to understand like what alternative solutions they were using. So what situational factors drive childcare needs, and what childcare arrangements were utilized, what concerns that drive the parent or caregiver decision-making behavior for childcare arrangements, and what are their preferences for care based on those decisions. And how do generational and cultural influences dictate preferences for childcare arrangements? Were the context of all the questions.
Yeah, and for our methods, so those questions were reflected in these inquiry themes, and like, yeah, yeah.
If you go back, so just to touch on what you were looking at, the inquiry themes, again, we talked about the 3 categories of questions we asked. So that provided background on their upbringing, then their, how that influenced their situations, and the current situation factors that contributed to needing childcare arrangements, that fed into their preferences, and then that provided us information on the decision-making behaviors.
Yeah. So we use snowball sampling for this, for our research collection. And Georgia, if I'll kind of explain this, and then if you want to talk on kind of like that process of like doing those interviews, we used snowball sampling, and the first wave there were 3 seeds, and that transitioned to those 3 seeds finding 13 people, and then the third wave of 8 additional interviews. And this resulted in 24 interviews being completed. And then Georgia, can you just talk a little bit on the process of the interviews?
Yeah, the process was virtually. So the first 3 people were able, we wanted to make sure that we were outside of our network. So of course, expanding to gather more input from other, from using other people's networks to make sure that we had like a good take, not just our experiences, but more broadening. So the first wave was the first 3 people, and all these interviews were done virtually. And then we allowed them to, or not allowed, but we had the first 3 people interview the second group, and then the second group interviewed the other. This called for training also and a lot of patience. But it was an opportunity to allow people to have the relationship, so people were comfortable, because especially in communities of color, it was a little bit intimidating to share, or that's like a vulnerability. So we knew that that was important to this research. And another part I would say about doing this is, well, I would just say that it allowed us to get more authentic information from our interviewees than if we would have done it like ourselves, like me doing all the interviews.
Yeah, well, that referral system that you're speaking on was really to like help by like trust, right? And I think that is like the method of snowball sampling really worked in our benefit. So for them to be able to, you know, find people who they felt could benefit from having this conversation or benefit from having their voice shared, to then refer them back to Georgia to be able to have those conversations, was really what I think got us the really good data that we were able to get. So for the participant demographics for this, just real quick, 23 out of 24 identified as Black or African American, and the same number, 23 out of 24 identified as women. The average age was 34, and the average number of children per household was 2.5. So George and I, so really quick, for the demographic information, George and I went back and forth, trying to figure out how to measure income, and finally opted to not ask about it at all. And it was through our process of, drafting the questions with the home care worker, like the few folks on our team to, for member checks, right? To say, there's really no good way to talk about or to ask, because of the pandemic, people were employed, underemployed, or unemployed. But also when Georgia was speaking on these informal systems, there's also informal systems of work and income. So, and then also over the course of the pandemic, people were in and out of the workforce. So only a few folks, I think, or I would say the majority of people had either discussed multiple jobs or working or whatnot. And that was kind of to speak to the question about what situations require you to have or to need childcare. But overall, I think it was really good info, just like, me listening to these interviews, to do the data analysis, was that a lot of people brought it up anyways. And by not spending so much time on income, actually allowed for the question to focus on childcare and the impacts that childcare has on work and not vice versa. So for a few findings, so we'll go through two main findings. First, our relationship management framework that rose out of our conversations. And then also Georgia will speak a little bit more on this dissonance between finding like their current arrangement and then finding the ideal arrangement. So here we found that there was 3 stakeholders that were, so I guess I'll quick talk about this idea of storytelling. So when people were talking about the relationships they had with the provider, but also with their child, this data specifically came through when they're talking about a narrative or they're talking about an example. So the more that Georgia in interviewing process was able to like lean into, can you like give me these examples? That's where we really got into the richness of it. So this triangle represents kind of the reinforcing relationships between the 3 stakeholders in the child care process, and who's implicated in that most directly. And it shows like, right, so the red lines are direct relationships, and what people were talking about in these, or the caregiver, for example, was talking about, the caregiver or those who identified as parents were talking about in these direct relationships are the topics that arose. So for example, when the caregivers were considering their relationship with the care provider, they're talking about hours, cost, type of arrangement, whether that's friends, family, neighbor, family care or group care, the location, and then like, what is it that they prefer because of their background. But then the relationship between the care provider and the child, the main themes that arose was cleanliness, education or curriculum, infectious disease control, and like relating to COVID-19, and then cultural relevance or the diversity in the fostering of diversity in the care environment. And then the last relationship was between the caregiver and the child, and the topics that rose there were the characteristics of the child. So do they have needs because of a developmental disability such as autism, or like they have behavioral considerations such as, they're really shy or whatnot, but also the child's preference. So many parents had talked about, my child prefers really like quiet places, etc. In that. And we just wanted to quick point out that a multidisciplinary approach is what was really kind of essential. Like once we were collecting the data, we're realizing that we were most interested at the beginning of the study between the relationship between the caregiver and the care provider, which is representative of, right, we're interested in community psychology or community development. But because this is a reinforcing triangle, all of those, you have to look at all those things for the purposes of community development that we're looking at. But while these direct relationships exist, there's the indirect relationship that the caregiver has to the direct relationship between the care provider and the child. So Georgia's going to speak on this in a minute, but really that third, or I guess rather that, that third relationship on the blue line is what is a privilege. So to be able to have those preferences of cleanliness, education, first, the hours and costs have to be met before that management can occur. And last, there's the third direct relationship, or the fourth relationship, which is the caregiver's relationship to work. And while this includes managing their hours, whether or not they have just-in-time scheduling or on-call scheduling, or having an understanding manager, all of those things were also implicated in that relationship. So when we talk about decision-making and decision-making about care arrangements, the red arrows that the caregiver, so the direct relationships that the caregiver has, are the things that must be met first. But then the blue line is like, well, when we're imagining what we want, what is to happen, those other things have to be met. So very last thing, right, is that the participants also showed this consciousness about class, race, and gender, and this framework needs to be embedded in this larger context. So when George was talking about like the home care and direct care work, we know that direct care work traditionally has low wages, is underpaid, significantly underpaid, and it really boils down to having to friends, family, neighbor care rolls out to be a community-based strategy. And Georgia will speak a little bit more, like, actually right now, Georgia, I invite you to like talk a little bit about that, on how friends, family, neighbor care is like a true, like a strategy because of this broader context.
I think, so it's not, I think, as you know, we did the interviews, and like I said, from personal and information from other parents, and then the project, this research project, the informal systems of friends, family, and neighbor care are historical. They go back to my parents and many parents of the others, and even some of the communities, again, in those other states that I was talking about, as one of the solutions to being able to assess affordable childcare. I don't know the like DCF reasoning behind like why we moved away from, or not to put more resources into formalizing those informal care systems, but it truly is a community-based solution. I will give you context in as far as, or an example of like, at one point there were, if we look back in history for like these communities of colors, there were what we call big mamas, or our grandmothers, and that was referenced a lot in the interviews of who had to take care of them, along with those friends and neighbors. There was like this community solution, but for some reason, from where we were then to where we are now, we've kind of moved away from that, which is why it was so important for me to do this research, to find out how we can formalize those systems again and get the resources that are needed to uplift and expand those to these communities that were already using them, but really digging into what people now feel like the value is to using those systems is what we needed to gather in this research. And then there's a difference between the current arrangements and their ideal arrangements, because we found that it is a privilege for parents to have a preference in arrangement and caregivers background. Like all of them were saying, like they wish they could afford, or to afford and find a childcare environment that had that friends, family, and neighbor value that they felt that was so significant, and strongly influenced their upbringing and their current preference. So I just say that when I found a lot of people like asking questions in the childcare network of like, what is quality care? And it's situational, with all the different the different things they're navigating in these communities of color and the non-traditional. Specifically, let's just talk about non-traditional. So it could be anyone that's not necessarily a community of color, but those, changing of jobs, multiple jobs, all the demands that call for meeting the needs of that family really don't allow them the privilege of having a preferred childcare arrangement or caregiver's background. So a lot of us, what may seem so simple, you know, is really a privilege. We learned. So I know I want to make sure we have at least 10 minutes for questions, but again, I've touched on this as the how we respond to the work, and my response to the information we learn, the decision making, and the preferences are going into the We Care for Us childcare cooperative initiative, or a community-based initiative that I am working on, or we're working on. The solution to this project, and I feel like this, we don't feel, but we know for a fact that this research project supports that, is to build this second and third shift childcare cooperative that will benefit these low-income or working poor parents in single-family homes who struggle to climb the career ladder, and give them the opportunity to have the environments they prefer for their children in their neighborhoods, and decrease the challenges that are often experienced with traditional childcare hours and the childcare subsidies that don't really reflect the needs of those communities. So our goals in We Care for Us is to provide increase the number of in-home childcare centers that will offer quality second and third shift, provide the support that the working poor in the communities, and those communities need to climb the career ladder, to family supporting jobs, and to, again, a lot of my work is to value these devalued jobs like caregiving, whether that's for an adult or a child, and help them have living wages, professional development and training opportunities, where these the increased family childcare centers we are producing will have the umbrella to support to support them on the overhead or at the administrative side, to be able to fully focus on providing quality care. This for us is important because it's going to change the trajectory of a lot of families and the education that children will receive, because right now families are, and it has been there, where families are utilizing friends family in these communities because their capacity and bandwidths are so tight, dealing with a number of things, trauma, whatever. They'll get the resources they need while they're providing these supports to families who are trying to work professional, personal development, so that they can pour into these children, instead of like the children not getting what they're needing because there's not a support network or resource flow for them. So this will help our community overall as a whole. Education goals to see increased education outcomes for the children. It's a two-gen approach. We're taking care of the parents so that they can take care of the children. We're taking care of the providers so that they can take care of the children. That is our goal with this project. Lots of work we've put into it, lots of work to go ahead. We're not saying that we're just saying it's time for something new. Data research advocates for childcare have already said this, made the point. The Biden administration agrees. We need some new and innovative platforms, and that's what We Care for Us will provide. Dane County as a first. Gretchen?
Yeah, so just to wrap up, we just have a few people we want to shout out to. Thanks to Ava, Dr. Sarmiento and Josie for all of like reviewing things and spending their time with us and sharing their knowledge. But also thank you to the Mortgage Center for financially supporting this project and the opportunity to be able to present this. So if you would like to contact us, please reach us at either at our emails, and I'll also put them in the chat, but I want to devote time now to questions. And if you have any, you can just either unmute yourself or put them in the chat.
I will also add, this research isn't the end. There's a lot to learn from our communities, a lot to learn from the people that this project will serve. So I appreciate the opportunity to learn about how to do research. I've done a number of focus groups, but this was a great opportunity. So thank you, Mortgage Center, for the opportunity.
Well, I just want to thank you for the presentation. I just am blown away by the project, and I think it's so exciting that that the Mortgage Center was able to dedicate time and resources to researching this project, and in that it's coming to fruition. I'm curious, where is it, like, in the stage of development? Is it about to be launched, or, and you might have covered it, but I was just kind of curious what the next step is.
We are finishing our feasibility study, and our plan is to launch. Originally, our plan was to launch in the fall of 2021 with the pandemic and a number of other the pandemic really is what has kind of slowed that process. We are projecting to launch in 2021 with the group center that will provide that supportive network for the in-home providers. And so the group center location, given the market for purchasing, is a factor that has slowed that down. But we've wrapped up our feasibility study.
Yeah, and I just to highlight at the end right there, what George is saying is we're really trying to leverage that shared service model to prioritize like family providers, because the family providers are giving the locations within the communities, and proximity to home was one of those things that people kept bringing up, having to have 20-minute drives one way for care. So we've done some of the financial projections, but are really looking at also recruiting providers at this point, just to gauge interest in being part of the network.
Yeah, we had to work through the value proposition for that. Yeah, it's a shift in going from independent to being a community-based network.
My church is in the Lucier Community Center area, and I know that there are many people in our congregation who are interested in the well-being of those people who are living in low-income housing in that Tree Lane neighborhood. And I wonder how individuals or organizations who are not a part of the people of color network by everyday interaction can be supportive in a way that is, I mean, I totally believe in what you're talking about. I just totally get it. I come from the era in which there was no childcare available in my day and age, unless you had a granny or somebody when I was going to graduate school. And finally, we got the university to start a daycare center, at least so we could bring our kids there during the while we were at school, you know, which was one of the models from that time. And I consider, as I kind of take my stuff to the food shelf and take the needed things to the Tree Lane apartments, and that if there's not a way, if there's not something more than that, then people who have some energy and who have a commitment to childcare specifically could offer into this community without being patronizing or disrespectful in any way, or nor I certainly don't think I have any great knowledge to give except the pain of what it's like to be a parent without good childcare available. So I'm just curious as to if there's any ideas about that beyond, I suppose, some financial support of some kind.
Yeah, no, there is, and I want to make sure I'm clear that, you know, this is, a lot of systems are built for the world, but I think making sure that this system is built to alleviate the barriers that this community of color may experience. But that does not mean that the diversity, the connections to other ethnicities and cultures, that was one of the things. There needs to be diversity. So I just wanted to say that like this isn't built to just to exclude anyone. The way that you can support that is, you know, you can provide expertise, volunteer to, we're not open yet, but I see there's many opportunities to overlap. For example, I'm hoping to have opportunities for UW to be exposed to, their teachers can come in and support the project. Community members, faith-based organizations, there'll be plenty. And if you want Ms. Nancy to email me or add your email information or number, I'll be happy to follow up with you. But most importantly, I think at this point, what we can ask for is expertise, networking. I've already called through with Rika. We're connected with them and we're working with them. But, you know, expanding the awareness of what's happening, what's needed, and being available when we open to support it. And you can provide ideas. That's why I want to connect with you, Nancy. Like, how do you think you can contribute? I truly believe in listening to the voices of our community to help to keep us thriving, right? Like, it's not, all these ideas are not just coming from me, it's coming from the voices in the community, whether that's the participant in the programs or the community members.
Well, and I think that funding is a really important piece that people, you know, if you talk about reparations or the desire to be actively involved in changing the underlying structure, I feel very enthusiastic. I'm so excited about what you're doing. I guess I should say that. And hats off to you, M.Ed person Gretchen, for tackling this project and providing research, the research format in which to do that. I love the idea of the kinds of, whatever you call this, I got to see this now, where the snowball sampling technique, which I never have heard of. And I just think it's so intuitive, and I just salute you for using that and finding it to be a powerful story, when stories are so important. And if we can listen to stories, we can hear what needs are and what people's are experiences and what they have to offer in terms of their problem solving and creative problem solving in their own lives and what they've done. So hats off to you both. And I'd like to stay in touch with what's going on. So I'll put my email in the chat.
And to all who are on the call, who are in this work field, I just want to say that, you know, we're in this together. I'm not, you know, we see that there's a need nationally, you know. This isn't to step on anybody's toes. There's a lot of partnering. There's a lot of, we're just expanding, listening. I think personally from experience of being in a community that doesn't feel like their voices are, like we don't know what we need, when all the times it's just not, the resources don't align with what we need. So I think that is not, I think, I know that is what I'm promoting forward. We are doing something different, that is not necessarily different. We're expanding the boat, and we are making sure there's space for those, as committed to this as I was when I first started this, that they will be able to contribute. That's Nancy's, that's Dr. Sacramento, that is, Paula's, that is Gretchen, and myself. So I'm just excited to add to the work that everyone is already doing. And I look forward to being able to celebrate this again at the beginning of 2021, 22. Oh Lord, 21. We're not going backwards.
All right, thank you all so much, all the audience and the presenters, Gretchen and Georgia. This was fabulous, learned so much. I'm seeing a lot of comments in the chat that are so appreciative of you all. And I'm gonna turn the recording off, but I can leave this space open for continued networking and connections in case you wanna continue the conversation. But just wanted to send some deep appreciation for the space you created here for us to learn and make connections with each other. So thank you for that.
Thank you.